Welcome to Austen Mondays, everyone. I am your host, Edward G. Pettit from the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for 24 weeks, with just 4 weeks to go now, we've been on a biblio-venture with Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In each episode, I talk with a special guest, a brilliant Austen scholar or two, creator or Janeite about Austen and her works. And then I have an hour-long conversational annotation with a chapter co-host in which we illuminate, elucidate, explicate a few chapters of Pride and Prejudice. And our special guests today are Lauren Wethers and Emily Davis-Hale from the Reclaiming Jane podcast. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
I am so happy to have you guys. As I told you, I wish I'd had you on sooner. So you guys do great work on your podcast. I really love it. So
much appreciated.
More with Lauren and Emily in a moment. Stay tuned for our chapter annotation segment when Kathleen Hudson will join me. You saw in the credits it said Lauren Nixon. Lauren, unfortunately, can't be here tonight. And so Kathleen is filling in for chapters 53 to 55, or volume 3, chapters 11 to 13. Jane and Bingley. Finally, a marriage we can all be happy about, or an engagement we can all be happy about. They're not married yet. So, if you're watching live on YouTube right now, or if you're just watching this as a recording, I invite you to please like the video and also subscribe to the channel. Doing that gives our show greater visibility and leads to more people discovering Austen Mondays. And at the break today, after the Turnabout the Room segment, I'm going to tell you guys all about the Austen Mondays raffle that we're having for the last few shows, and in which you can enter a raffle and win some fabulous prizes every week. So I'll tell you about that at the break. But for now, let's take a turn about the room. Emily Davis-Hale is a consummate word nerd with a BA, MA, and in-progress PhD in linguistic anthropology. And Lauren Wethers is a writer with a lifelong love of literature, who completed a BA in English and Spanish, an MA in English, and a minor in film studies at Tulane University. Their Reclaiming Jane podcast is for all those who have felt like you're not allowed to like Jane Austen, whether because her work is too white, too academic, or too straight. They have recently finished a read-through of Emma, and before that was Mansfield Park and Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. You can find their podcast at reclaimingjanepod.com. I am so pleased to have you both for a turnabout the room today.
Happy to be here.
How many episodes have you guys done on your podcast? How many years has it been?
Oh, 2 years now. Number of episodes, I'll defer to Emily.
Oh, don't make me do math in my head. We have done 4 seasons of approximately 12 episodes on average, so approaching 50 episodes probably.
Mm-hmm.
And you fit 2 seasons in a year then? Yeah. So,
yes.
Yeah. So you do it smart. I take my time and meander, and so and then it goes on for a very long time.
If we took our time and meandered, I don't know that we'd ever finish.
Yeah, it's hard not to. So people keep asking me, they want me to do Moby Dick, and I will only do Moby Dick if I could do a chapter a week, and then it's going to take 3 years. So it's 137 chapters, and you'd want like some weeks off.
Oh no.
So that's why I haven't signed up for Moby Dick. But people can start guessing as to what will be the next book in the fall, because I will announce that on March 13th on the episode. The penultimate episode, I will let everyone know what our next book will be.
Nice.
It's not about us. It's about you guys. You're on the show. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's giving me cover because, of course, something decides to get in my eye as soon as we start talking. So you can continue. You're good.
Well, I want to ask you guys what I ask everyone about their Austen discovery moment. You have a moment in your life where you discovered Jane Austen. Emily, you want to go first?
Sure. So in preparing, I guess, for this episode, it occurred to me that what I thought was my first Austen moment was actually not, because when I was about 14, I started reading Sense and Sensibility, hated it, and gave up after a couple of chapters. So my true Austen discovery was about a year later when I picked up Pride and Prejudice. being very enamored with the romance of reading old literature at the time.
Had you watched any of the 95 BBC before that?
No, at that point I had not.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it was, this may be controversial, but it was the 2005 Pride and Prejudice that really stole my heart.
That's not controversial anymore. That's, that is a, it's that's another one of those generational things. That's
Absolutely.
where you encounter it first, and it's a beautiful movie. So that works.
Goodness.
Lauren?
Yes.
How about you? What was your Austen discovery moment?
You know what? I found it through Apple's iBooks, funnily enough. I think when I was, how old was I? I want to say 13 or 14, and mine was also Pride and Prejudice. Mm-hmm. And I remember I flew through it so quickly that my mom didn't believe that I had found the unabridged version of Pride and Prejudice. She was convinced that I had found an abridged version because she said there was no way that I had read it that quickly. I think she should have known her daughter a little bit better and known how much of a voracious reader I was even then. But that was my first introduction to Jane Austen, was through the Pride and Prejudice ebook on Apple iBooks, I think, that I had for free. And then after that, I don't think I read more Austen until college. I took a seminar on Jane Austen my junior year of college and then was able to read all of her works then.
Yeah.
I remember you taking that class.
Yeah. Emily and I were roommates in college, so they had a front row seat to my giant stack of Austen books.
How you guys met? Did you guys meet up in college then, and then started doing all these kinds of things? Did you do anything else for the podcast, or was this your first venture into doing something together like this?
This was the
Never
first
worked
one
together on a project like this before. Yeah.
And it's been really great.
How did this come about?
Bored during quarantine.
Well, we started our shows during. I mean, I had to come up with some programs. That was my job. So, but yeah, it was a quarantine project. That's how you started.
Yeah, I think we have the screenshot of the text messages I said to Emily that said, "I have a great idea. What if we did a podcast that was focused on Jane Austen, and then just kind of like traded ideas back and forth from there?" And we had started thinking about it in summer 2020, and then really took our time to plan and decide, okay, what do we want the podcast to be? Like, what do we want to say with the podcast? And then because we are both super nerds, we decided what would be a really great idea is to have our very first episode premiere on Jane Austen's birthday, which is why we now have episodes that premiere on Wednesdays, because that day of our podcast, December 16th, 2020, was a Wednesday, and we have stuck to every Wednesday bi-weekly since then.
And you get to play it too, because Lauren, you're at least more familiar with Austen's works, right? And yes. Emily, you tend to be at least on one of them or more than one. You were a first-time reader, is it?
I'm a first-time reader well, as I said, I had technically started Sense and Sensibility. And similarly, I started reading Emma at some point and didn't get into it. Mm-hmm. So Pride and Prejudice was the only one that I had read all the way through before we started the podcast.
Everybody in the audience like me or has read tons of them, and everybody in the audience, we all envy you. Like, we all want that first reading. But I get to do it through I get to live vicariously first reading experiences through my kids. What struck you, Emily, as a first-time reader with Austen's works? In anything in particular strike you with them as a first-time reader?
I think a lot of what we think of as the defining characteristics of Austen, like the humor and the commentary, it all very much comes through in Pride and Prejudice. But in reading some of the other novels, different things come out more strongly. And so I think probably what struck me the most was when we got to Mansfield Park in our third season, and the commentary of especially the class differences really started to make themselves known in a way that had been touched on in the first two books that we read, but it was much more explicit when we got there. And then going from Mansfield Park to Emma, it was like, oh, the humor is back now.
Yeah.
And it's incredible for me to be able, you said you get to live vicariously through your children. I really love watching Emily go through and read the books for the first time. So I'm looking forward to continuing to ask for predictions and to get their thoughts on what's happening with upcoming books. because it adds so much levity and so much fun to the experience of reading the book, of getting to read it along with someone who's experiencing it for the first time.
When you introduce someone, it's not they're your offspring. Emily's your Austen offspring. When you introduce someone to a topic and like they don't know it well, and that's it's a lot of fun to do. How did you then shape it into the kind of form that you have now, like a show for people to be more inclusive, or just describe to me what your approach is?
Well, when we were taking that time to think about what we wanted the podcast to be, we wanted to be intentional. That was one of the first things that we decided, is that we wanted the podcast to be an inclusive space for everyone. I know in my case, I've never felt as though the books themselves didn't welcome me, but I did feel that way about Austen fandom, or about being able to engage with the books or the movies or what have you in a wider space, because it's difficult if you want to go to an Austen event and you look around and no one really looks like you, or you don't feel as though you're wanted there. But that doesn't mean that people who don't fit the archetype of a stereotypical Austen fan aren't reading and enjoying her works, because everyone can like Jane Austen, and Jane Austen can be for everyone. And that was really the central ethos of what we wanted to get at in our podcast. So if there were other people who had felt alienated from thinking that this could not be for them, to show them that this is something that you can have and that you can claim, and that it can be yours. And that's where the name came from as well, reclaiming Jane, of this can be yours as well, and you can claim that for yourself.
How does that play out in how you, or does it play out in how you talk about the work itself? I mean, are you looking at issues in it that gear more towards inclusivity?
Yeah, we absolutely will choose many times to very specifically talk about ways that issues that are important to us, whether that's race or gender or sexuality, and a whole myriad of other things, how that is or specifically is not addressed in Austen. But that's also part of the reason that we bring in both the history and the pop culture, is to, for one, contextualize Jane Austen's work in her own time when she was writing, but also to bring a little bit more fun to it, because a lot of people see any kind of older work as inherently stuffy and inaccessible. And sometimes just saying, well, hey, the same thing happens in this show that was airing last week. And that just might be the bridge that gets somebody to realize that maybe Austen is cool.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time when you could talk about Austen and all you had was like one movie from 1940. There was nothing else until, 1980. And then really not again until, 95. But now it's her books are completely intertwined with for people who experience them with adaptations.
And I think that's an accessibility piece too. If you can watch a movie and realize it's something that you enjoy, then maybe you're more likely to go and pick up the book.
Yeah. So anything about Pride and Prejudice that struck you as we, talk about, let's talk a little bit about representation in Austen's works first off. And how about in Pride and Prejudice? How did you guys, were there topics in this novel that you thought helped you talk about this inclusivity? Or is it more the audience? You know what I mean?
I think one of the things that we were able to talk about with Pride and Prejudice, with the presence of the militia, was colonialism. And Emily did really good historical research as well to bring that in. So when we're talking about the troops are moving and we see random groups of militia, why are we seeing random groups of militia? Where are they coming back from? Where are they going? And then what does that mean about who is or is not represented in the text that we're reading? I think that was something that we were able to use to get really good discussions going about, here's something that's on the page of Pride and Prejudice, and then here's so we can have a jumping off discussion about what Jane Austen might be saying, or even what she's not saying, but what we can bring into our interpretation of the book too.
Certainly issues of class too, especially, the chapters we're doing tonight, the kind of servants keep popping up in it. And I always find that seems to be the way it works in Austen. It's, nobody's concerned with servants, and then someone will mention them, and then you realize that not only they're there, but they're kind of influencing things that are going around in small ways. How about in adaptations? Do you guys then intertwine the adaptations that come out, and how do you, because it's beyond Austen, it's now the whole Bridgerton phenomenon and just the whole people representing the Regency in a sense is really becoming far more inclusive, I think, in the way I see it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we haven't, at least in the podcast proper, we don't touch very much on adaptations. Sometimes we do as a specific topic of conversation, but we, unlike some other podcasts, don't make a point of doing specific episodes on adaptations. And part of that is because, like you said, it's grown beyond Austen. There's so many additional layers that come into any kind of adaptation, regardless of the medium, that it could be an entire project on its own just to talk about Austen adaptations. But it has been really interesting to see the conversation happening both in Austen fandom and surrounding it about the inclusivity and the efforts that people are making to kind of rectify what's been seen as exclusion in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's an interesting conversation to be had about how Bridgerton has enabled people to create more of an entryway into enjoying Regency era fiction, whether that's Jane Austen, whether that's the Bridgerton themed Regency romance, or Austen's contemporary authors of, I think Bridgerton and the craze it inspired has shown people that there's perhaps more to Regency than they had imagined in the past, and gives people that visual representation of you can enjoy this period piece and see people who look like you reflected in it as well. And even though there might not be people on the page in a Jane Austen novel who necessarily look like you, it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it. And that's one of the things that we talk about as well, is those people existed in the Regency, even if they're not necessarily depicted on the page. So that's another aspect that we can bring into the conversation about, even if it's not explicitly mentioned in the text, here are the groups of people who were in Regency England at this point in time. And you don't get to be told that you didn't exist in Regency England just because that's the common conception of it, because you did, and you can imagine yourself in these stories as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another thing that we've touched on a few times is the idea that at a certain point, it becomes your interpretation to do with as you wish. So if you have decided in your mind that the Bennets are Black, then the Bennets are Black. Like, who can tell you that you are completely wrong? Like, that's your story now.
Mm-hmm. I find that more and more as these days, the kind of one of the generational differences that I found in reading is that a younger generation coming up, which, I have the beard, I could say that. Of your generation is that you look for representation far more in works than my generation was even told to do. That we were told, it was specifically told that was not something we should look for. We shouldn't look for ourselves. We should look for other people and, imagine other things. But I find that that's not the way that so many young people want to read now. They want themselves in these works. They want to be able to identify that that's part of being inclusive.
Yeah, and I think it's something that you don't always realize that you're looking for until you have it. So I didn't really have a choice, especially when I was younger, of being able to look for myself. There were plenty of children's books authors who were writing diverse characters in the past, but those numbers in comparison to other young adult or children's book fiction were minuscule. And that problem still persists in publishing today. So if I wanted to read a book, I was going to read about people who were different than me. That was just going to be how it was. And you get used to never seeing yourself reflected in the media that you love and that you consume. And then when you do have that, it feels like this wonderful affirmation that you belong in the spaces that you've been adoring from afar for so long.
Yeah.
And I think I really love that we're able to have these conversations about what representation is and bringing it into the conversation more about why representation is so important, because everyone deserves to feel seen in the media that they consume.
It feels like being able to take a breath for the first time when you didn't realize that you weren't taking a deep breath before. Like, oh, that's what that should feel like.
Yes.
Good. We had a question from somebody in the audience from Lona. She says, to clarify, by not allowed to like Austen, do you mean some people won't allow themselves to like Austen because of the imperialism, etc., or do you mean fandoms don't allow you to enjoy Austen, or both? Is there a gatekeeping issue going on as well?
It's both, absolutely. There are definitely internalized reasons that people think, well, Jane Austen isn't really for me. But in a wide variety of fandom spaces, whether that's online or in-person groups, there's always some kind of gatekeeping going on. Okay, maybe not always, but historically there has been a lot of exclusion of scholars of color, of queer scholars, from applying their specific interpretations to classic literature in general and Austen specifically as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the question. That's a great one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So now next you'll turn to Persuasion. That'll be next on your podcast list. I won't throw out any spoilers because Emily, you haven't read it at all, right? So
I have not.
How do you see that one going for issues of inclusivity? Lauren, you want to start with that? I mean, are there things already that you're thinking like, ooh, I know we can talk about this?
Should I turn my speaker off so I don't get spoiled?
No, I'm very skilled in the art of not spoiling you at this point. I'm always interested. There is, in every Austen novel, 10,000 different class interpretations that you can read into the book. And I'm excited to discuss that in Persuasion as well, because there's so many different directions that we can take that conversation when it comes to like class and desirability and access. And I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation to have. And then I also, one of the things that we were able to do very early on was we had the YouTube show called Rational Creatures as guests on our podcast, and they have a modern YouTube miniseries of Persuasion that's like a queer modern day retelling of it. And so I think it'll also be interesting to kind of compare the modern day YouTube queer version of Persuasion that Rational Creatures is creating to the book and see what other interpretations we can draw from that. What does it look like, or what does it mean to queer Jane Austen? What would it look like if we gender swap some of these characters? How do those love stories change? How is that complicated? I think that'll be a really cool conversation to have as well.
Yeah, for Pride, we had that fabulous Fire Island film that works so well.
Such a great adaptation.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion, one of the best Jane Austen movies ever.
Well, regularly people, rank, Clueless as I mean, I've seen that ranked in plenty of places as the best Austen adaptation. So you don't have to do a necessarily kind of, faithful, accurate adaptation in who the characters are and where you set it, and how that you could, reset it somewhere else, and it can still deal with all the same issues.
Yeah, there are so many cool analogs and connections you can make between the original setting and any other setting that I love seeing the places that people go with those.
So I mean, not that you would envision, an endpoint for your podcast or for your podcast, but do you see this going beyond Austen at some point?
I don't know about beyond Austen. We have talked about what do we do when we've gone through the Austen canon. We'd like to continue bringing more voices onto the podcast who may not get the same opportunity or same platform to discuss their work. So bringing like scholars of color, people who are doing Austen adaptations and retellings, things like that, to see if that might be a way to continue the podcast past reading the books and going through those section by section or chapter by chapter. But we're kind of up in the air. We'll see where it goes. I think at this point, we have ideas of what we might like to do, but we're also not trying to get ahead of ourselves too much. But for the moment, along for the ride, but I think we'll keep it focused on Austen for now.
Well, I'd like what you're doing a lot. I just, I've had the opportunity just to listen to some of the Pride and Prejudice in the last episode. And the last episode, everyone, they do a 6 degrees of separation kind of where people send in topics and then you have to connect them in some way to Austen. I think the last episode was Mount Vesuvius, and so people aren't sending, things that you would normally think. So.
No, they make it difficult for us.
Yeah, sometimes it's really hard.
Good. That's a lot of fun. Well, thank you both. I wish you much luck. I mean, I'm really looking forward to listening to your Persuasion episodes, and that'll begin for listeners when?
March 15th.
Great. March. It's always a Wednesday. That's when is that when all the new episodes drop?
Absolutely.
Great. All righty. Well, I look forward to that. And I want to thank you both for taking a turn about the room with us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Excellent.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful time.
Great. All right. I hope we can do something together in the future, maybe. All righty.
Definitely.
Bye-bye, Lauren.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
Emily.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, everyone, we have only 3 more shows and 2 more Turnabout the Room guests coming up. Juliet Wells will return on March 6th next week to talk about Emma, to go along with the course she's going to be teaching for the Rosenbach on Emma, the virtual course. And on March 13th, Claudia Johnson will finally be on the show. And then the last episode on March 20, we will not have a Turnabout the Room guest. It would just be all the co-hosts and myself. So let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Austen lovers worldwide. And if you'd like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. You can also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. And at the end of every show, I give a shout out to all of those who have donated or joined since our last show. And I'll do that today. But first, the Austen Mondays raffle announcement. As the show draws to a close, I want to thank everyone for their participation and passion for this program. It really has been a joy to host and engage with you each week. But it's not a goodbye yet. We still have, 3 more episodes after today. To demonstrate that gratitude, though, we are raffling off a series of wonderful prizes that will continue your exploration of Jane Austen's work. In addition, all the proceeds from the raffle will help support future free programs like the one we do here at the Rosenbach. And the 3 prizes are, the first one is for this week, but all 3 are, the first one is an exclusive Jane Austen package, which includes 3 autographed books, 2 by Devoney Loser and 1 by Natalie Jenner, along with an Abigail Adams level membership. The second prize, which will be next week, is a reserved spot in our upcoming virtual course, Reading Austen's Emma with Juliet Wells. And the third prize, in 2 weeks from now, will be a private tour of the Rosenbach's Jane Austen collection with me. Either if you want to do it in person, we could do it virtually. It'd be great if you could do it in person, but that's what we'll be raffling off for the third one. So this week, we're raffling off number 1, the Jane Austen package. And I will be pulling the winner live on the show on next week's show. And let me tell you a little more about that and how to do that. Here is the info. This is this week's prize. It's the Devoney Loser's new novel, or new nonfiction book, Sister Novel. It's about the Porter sisters and her making of Jane Austen, both signed, and Natalie Jenner's novel, The Jane Austen Society, along with a complimentary Abigail Adams Rosenbach membership. I want to thank Devoney and Natalie for donating signed copies of their books. And what you do is you go to our website, and the link's in the chat now, and I'll put it on the YouTube video as well. Entries begin at $15, and you can buy as many tickets as you like and increase your odds of winning. One ticket is $15, 3 tickets are $30, 5 or 60, 10 for $120, 20 for $150. So you know, if you want to try to, you know, buy a lot of tickets, and the more you have, that increases your ability to win the prizes. And so you can do that now during the show. You can get them all throughout the week. The deadline for the first week will be 5 p.m. on Monday, March 6th, and then I pull the winner during the show. And this is for the first prize, the Jane Austen Package, and that'll be available for you to get tickets all week. And for today's chapter annotation segment, I want to welcome back Kathleen Hudson, even though you weren't in the credits. I'm sorry, Kathleen, if you saw the credits. I still had Lauren in the credits.
I'm masquerading as Lauren this week, so it's Dr. Lauren Nixon. Oh. No, it's great. It's good surprise guest. It's good to be here.
Yes, it was a surprise to have you on. I forgot to change the credits after we had to make the switch today.
Fine.
So there we go. But yeah, you see, we're having a raffle, so get people.
Yes. I was
money for the
sneaky
show
on my phone, just being like, okay, where do I access the raffle? That's great.
There you go. So, and you all week to do it. So I'll send out a reminder with the chapter email during the week, and we'll have it posted on the Facebook group. And you know, buy as many tickets as you want.
Oh, I will. I will.
We're also announcing the next weekly BiblioVenture program on March 13th, not next week, but the following. And that's when everyone will find out what the next book will be in our weekly series. Kathleen knows what it is. She's got,
I know, but I'm not
an
telling.
Inside scoop. She's not allowed to tell anybody. So that show will begin in September, and I'm very excited to do that one. Let's talk about first. Let's do the drinking with Jane and Ed segment, in which every week I enjoy a cocktail inspired by the chapters we're reading. And today's not really a cocktail, and I'm just going to be honest.
Okay.
It's called the Jane and Bingley Spritzer. Okay.
I saw you drinking from that before, and I'm like, that's a fascinating colored drink. I wonder what it is.
Well, for me, I told people white wine, flavored sodas, whatever you want to do, garnish it with berries. It's a white wine for me, and I got a pink grapefruit juice, cider, soda.
Yeah,
and a pomegranate soda. So I went for some unusual flavor, not usual flavors for it.
I'm a grapefruit person myself, so that works.
The more I tried to come up with a cocktail to honor Jane and Bingley, the more it seemed like hard liquors were just not there.
No,
it didn't represent.
This is nice. This is easy.
Light, effervescent, sunny characters.
Yeah,
so
it's a rainy Monday where I am, so this is such a nice way to end the day. It's this nice, really upbeat series.
Well, if people out there watch from Australia, it's summer, so you know it fits there even better. I would prefer I prefer a hard liquor cocktail though. Like I got to be completely honest.
But it's always summer if you're Jane and Bingley, so I guess that works.
Yes. Always summer for Jane and Bingley.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's what we're talking about today in our chapter segment. We're doing chapters 53 to 55, Jane and Bingley.
I think it's good. It's so sweet because the audacity of Wickham in the previous chapter is quite bitter. I was rereading it for tonight, and I was looking over that last chapter. I'm like, I'm still not over just the audacity. So there we are.
Well, Lydia. Well, and if you don't have the running numbers for your chapters, it's volume 3, chapters 11 to 13. When we last met, Lydia had conquered her sisters, at least in her own mind, and Elizabeth had conquered Wickham in his mind as well as hers, I think. but we'll see a little bit with him to start this chapter.
Yeah.
Mr. Wickham was so perfectly satisfied with this conversation. This is he and Elizabeth talking, her really putting him in his place, and him not knowing how to react and being quiet.
And basically attempting to gaslight her and it not working.
So, but this the
this is such an Austen thing.
This is dripping with iron here. Mr. Wickham so perfectly satisfied with this conversation that he had never again distressed himself or provoked his dear sister Elizabeth by introducing the subject of it, and she was pleased to find that she had said enough to keep him quiet. I mean, for perfectly satisfied, read cowed, sufficiently warned. Don't bring these topics up.
Never again distressed himself. His dear sister Elizabeth. Nope. That's one of those lines that you can just point to directly as Austen being the wit here.
He was clearly discomfited in their last exchange.
And probably very happy to never have this conversation again.
Yes. Well, Lydia and her husband are all going to Newcastle, and it was and seeing them again, it was likely to not, the separation was likely to continue at least a 12-month, or
not
never.
that seems to be bothering Lydia any.
Or never. Like I wonder, will Mr. Bennett ever relent to them visiting, or how would he ever let Kitty go at this point? Would the mother and Kitty be able to go, or would even that he would think like, no way, he's never allowing this to happen?
No, I think it's one of those, definitely everything that Mr. Bennett does is sort of a cost benefit analysis for him, which is this is what's the least inconvenience I can manage, and I think he has learned his lesson enough that it will be more inconvenient for him in the long run if he lets the women in his life do what they want, go visit, and I can't imagine him making a trip to Newcastle. Now, maybe if Lydia and Wickham come back. One of the things I liked about the Death Comes to Pemberley adaptation was that was a plot point of them coming back, and not to spoil it for anyone, but essentially they leave for America at the end of that show. So I'm like, that's great. Just send them to a completely different country. That's the best thing you could possibly do for them, really, because I don't foresee safe reacclimation into any of this.
Well, we do know today that Jane, is engaged to Bingley. I mean, I guess without talking about the end of the novel, if things turn out well enough for the older sisters, would Mr. Bennett even care at that point if Kitty went off and met some soldier and got married to him?
I mean, I think, but again, it was such a mad scramble to patch it up for Lydia. I think if he had to do another mad scramble for Kitty, then that would be
mad scramble. He went to London and didn't do anything because he couldn't.
Mad scramble. Well, for him, that's a mad scramble. I mean, for him, that's practically climbing Mount Everest. I mean, he had
Darcy
to
did the scramble.
Scramble. Scrambled eggs, more like, but some kind of scramble.
Lydia says, married women never have much time for writing. My sisters may write to me. They will have nothing else to do. She's still being insufferable. And Wickham's adieus were much more affectionate than his wife's. He smiled, looked handsome, and said many pretty things. He's still the pleasant young man.
Yeah. And Mr. Bennett isn't buying it at all, really. No. I mean, he buys it in his usual ironic way, which is he simpers and smirks and make love to us all. I am prodigiously proud of him. Very sarcastic.
It is. And, it's this final joke that it's Mr. Bennett now reasserting that this is the way I look at the world and this is the way I'm going to live. And for all this is all my fault,
nothing profoundly has changed. And for Mrs. Bennett as well, because again, she's upset, but not sorry. and definitely, I mean, Elizabeth says, this is a consequence of marrying a daughter. It must make you better satisfied that your other four are single. And she's like, no. It's not that she's married. It's that she's so far away from me.
Yeah.
That's the real issue. And again, it's not that we have to cast Lydia out, although, why not? But it's nothing has fundamentally changed about the elder Bennets in this scenario, for all that it could have been really terrible.
Well, just as Lydia did not seem to understand the gravity of running away with Wickham without getting married at first. Lydia, I really think Lydia doesn't think that was a bad, like, she doesn't understand it. It's not like she ignored it. I really think that she just didn't know. Mrs. Bennett did. Mrs. Bennett at least understood that was not a good thing to happen. But as soon as they were married, she's completely turned it around now. Now that it's, they're a married couple, there's nothing to be ashamed of. This is all wonderful. This is all what it was supposed to be.
Yeah. And I think it's a kind of understanding that Austen, again, does play with quite a bit in her novels, which is, it's not that she doesn't understand that this is a serious issue, but she understands it within a very romantic fiction kind of way. She's kind of Marianne Dashwood. It's the your father will have to fight a duel.
Yeah.
It's not really concerned necessarily so much about the practicalities of it. It's the assumption that there must be a duel and there must be this high drama, and I will feed into that. And it is, I think, Austen calling attention to, a superficial understanding of the consequences within a very romantic fiction kind of language versus a genuine understanding of the circumstances, which is what is really played out in the relationship between Elizabeth and Darcy in the chapters that immediately follow this one.
She understands the consequences, but only in a very selfish way, only in a very self-centered way. Even with the entailment, and sometimes I think she's not really concerned with her daughters so much. She's really concerned with herself. She's really concerned with, when the father dies, she herself will be out of a house and not be able to, take care of herself. And her getting her daughters married is her way of ensuring that she will be taken care of.
Yeah. That is insurance. Yeah. And unfortunately, the only kind of insurance she can take out, but still insurance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we find out Mrs. Phillips brings the news that Bingley is coming to town. Article of news, which then began to be in circulation. The housekeeper at Netherfield had received orders to prepare for the arrival of her master, who was coming down in a day or two.
Once the housekeeper knows, everyone in town knows.
And then so Mrs. Phillips ran into her. They tell you later who it was. It's Mrs. Nichols, who is on her way to the butcher's. And then she tells Mrs. Phillips, so she's now coming to tell them, and this kind of network of information and the way people find out things. But also it's also again the servants. It's the servants that's how they find out about things. The servants go and tell people what's happening.
And I do find it interesting. It's the servants, and it's also the servants as they participate within an economic exchange. It's what they're buying. It's that kind of very performative commercial culture that is the great equalizer to a certain extent. Is everyone's got to eat. And what you're buying is a reflection of your reality. So it's quite cool how she does that. That it's the servant who tells everyone, and it's because she's at the butcher's, and that's where the gossip is.
And Mrs. Bennett, of course, has this kind of, she's back and forth. That it's actually a pretty funny speech, right? Well, and so why don't you read that?
Well. And so Mr. Bingley is coming down, sister, for Mrs. Phillips first brought the news. Well, so much the better. Not that I care about it, though. He is nothing to us, and I am sure I never want to see him again. But however, he is very welcome to come to Netherfield if he likes it. And who knows what may happen. But that is nothing to us. Sister, we agreed long ago never to mention a word about it. And so is it quite certain he is coming?
I like the last question. And so it's
I
quite
have to hand it to again
like,
in the 2005 version. Brenda Blethyn, I think, does this very well. Just sort of this. Oh well, it's nothing to us, but is it quite certain?
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. She's and we get this back and forth up until he arrives. This that it doesn't matter, and yes, of course it matters considerably. She wants to do. She wants to start doing the same thing that she and Jane knows this right off the bat. Jane is
and you can. It's interesting that her real concern is. And she says, and I believe her to a certain extent, that I am not afraid of myself, but I dread other people's remarks.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a very circumspect. I mean, I think she is still at great risk emotionally, but that more to the point, and especially with the mother like she has, it's more, it's you suffer more from other people commenting on it.
Yeah. I mean, she tries to reason it out, like, I'm fine, I'm
fine.
Yeah.
Fake it till you make it.
Either in pleasure or pain, but she is disturbed by it. And then her reason is, well, it's because of how other people will look, though. But it is something. I mean, she is. Yeah. She's
reasonably hurt,
Yeah. But it is then she recognizes it's her mother. A little later, she says, my mother means well, but she does not know. No one can know how much I suffer from what she says. And, it's going to be, it's what her mother says. And her talking about it more than anything that bothers her.
Which is something too, again, that Elizabeth experiences throughout these chapters, because that's really the source of most of the mortification. And while she was aware of it at the beginning, I'm sure her relationship with Darcy really throws it into sharp relief that she is more aware of it now, how that is cutting them off from, really finding love, frankly.
Well, Mr. Bennett's not going to help. You forced me into visiting him last year. Nothing happened. I'm not doing it again. He can come if he wants. I'm not getting involved.
Yeah. Again, it's another exchange that absolutely cracks me up, because, they know where I live. Like, they'll have to find me in my own house if they want to talk to me. I just love that attitude, because it is just like, whatever.
It is. And I wonder, though, I know when Bingley arrives, it's up to everyone that lives around there to go and visit him. And Mr. Bennett is clearly the established gentry presence. He may not have as much money as Bingley does, but he's on a level, if
I think his not visiting is a massive snub. Yeah.
So, but I wonder now that once Bingley is established here, now when he returns, whether it's actually not etiquette for Bingley to come first anday.
Yes, I'm not 100% sure. And again, Lauren would probably know better than I about this, but I think once I know he had to go first. I know Mr. Bennett had to visit first, but I think once that connection is established, I mean, it's clearly considered, I guess, common courtesy to go visit once they come back. That seems to be what they're working with, and that Mrs. Bennett is, it sees this as her husband's incivility. But I don't think that there's necessarily a requirement. Like, it's clearly not that Bingley can't visit. And there is that mention later that he does have a standing invitation to dinner. So I think it's established enough that obviously there's nothing preventing it.
Regardless,
but I do think, I mean, to be fair, Mr. Bennett seems really put off the entire experience of having daughters at this point and engaging in society whatsoever. So I do think that him not going to visit is a bit of a snub, and I do wonder too, to be generous to Mr. Bennett, I wonder if a little bit of it isn't on Jane's behalf. That he doesn't, want to perpetuate this for Jane's sake, and feels a little bit, again, resentful of Bingley for Jane's sake. That may be giving Mr. Bennett a little bit more credit than he deserves. But, I mean, he's not, how he phrases it, you forced me to visit him last year and promised if I went to see him, it ended in nothing. I will not be sent on a fool's errand again. I mean, that's obviously very classic Mr. Bennett wit, but I do think there's an edge to it now, because Jane has obviously suffered, and that whole thing with Lydia has happened. I mean, I think it's enough to put any parent on his guard. And as much as Mr. Bennett hasn't changed, he does seem very put off by this entire process.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bingley does arrive. And of course, they learn through Mrs. Bennett, through the assistance of servants, contrived to have the earliest tidings of it. She's got her ear out there. She's making sure she finds out first. And then on the third, and she thinks that she's wondering when is he going to come?
Yeah.
And then it was on the third morning that she sees him from the window, and the girls have to come and see, and she's calling them, and then and Jane doesn't get up. Jane stays
resolutely kept to her place at the table. And again, I think it's interesting that she is not going to bend on this one.
Yeah. And then I love it because Elizabeth gets up to look out the window, and then as soon as she sees Darcy, she goes right over and sits next to Jane.
Yep.
She's not gonna now it's both of them in this, position where they don't want to seem like they're looking. So
never let them see you cry here. It's definitely that. And I do love how Kitty is just like, looks just like that same man that used to be with him before, Mr. What's his name, that tall, proud man.
Yeah.
I'm like, Kitty, just sit down.
And then Mrs. Bennett, but else I must say that I hate the very sight of him. So and Jane looks at Elizabeth with surprise and concern. She knew but little of their meeting in Derbyshire, and therefore felt for the awkwardness which must attend her sister in seeing him almost for the first time after receiving his explanatory letter. Elizabeth hasn't told Jane, and she'll say this later too, she hasn't told Jane about the whole re-meeting him and how it's rekindled everything. Jane just thinks, the last you saw him, he gave you that letter of explanation after you turned him down. So Jane thinks Elizabeth's only going to be uncomfortable because she has shot down his proposal, not that she has since rethought it and fallen in love with it. Yeah.
I know she's keeping some of this quiet out of respect for Jane's feelings, because obviously Bingley is tied up in everything to do with Darcy. But I am a little bit surprised, I guess, at some of her reticence about talking to her sister, her best friend, and her confidant. And I do think it reflects a little bit on Elizabeth that she really is very much ashamed of this and does not want to, or is still in the process of getting to know herself and her own flaws a little bit here. And it's a lot. It's a lot to
and
get
Jane
through.
Doesn't know about Darcy helping Lydia.
No
one does, except Elizabeth's the only one that knows.
Yeah.
She's the only one that's been given the information from the gardeners. But then we have this is interesting. They arrive, they come into the room. The color is driven from Jane's face for a minute, but then it returns, and then she's smiling. And then Elizabeth says, well, she really thinks, let me see how he behaved. What? Yeah, because this is Elizabeth. This is still Elizabeth's point of view. Let me see how he behaves. It will then be early enough for expectation. And I love the way that could be either. She could be thinking about Bingley and about her sister, but that's also what she's thinking about Darcy.
Yeah. It's deliberately ambiguous, I think. Yeah. That she's not secure.
I thought it was just Darcy, and then I went, wait a minute, no, it's not. And then I had to go through it like 3 times, read it, and it's clearly ambiguous.
Well, and even like a sentence before that, she thought for that space of time that his affections and wishes must still be unshaken. Again, not Darcy's or Bingley's, his. There's no distinction between the two that we can see yet.
Well, Darcy looks serious. He looks serious as usual. Elizabeth ventured only one glance at him. He looks serious as usual. And then she thinks perhaps he could not in her mother's presence, and this is understandable, be what he was before her uncle and aunt. It was a painful but not an improbable conjecture.
Yeah.
That Elizabeth starting to see now the difficulty, the social difficulty that Darcy has is due to the way her parents behave, not necessarily him.
Yeah. And that's painful not because not because of him, but because of her mother.
Yeah.
That it wasn't particularly pleasant before, but now it's outright painful and not improbable.
And then her mother, and then Elizabeth also thinks about how her mother doesn't know how they owe everything to him. He's the one that, got Wickham to marry Lydia.
Yeah. And even if she knew, who knows how she'd react. And again, she sinks down to everyone's expectations of her in this exchange. And
Darcy inquires how Mr. and Mrs. Gardner are, and a question which she could not answer without confusion. Like, she said, "Why are you asking me about them?" Like, she doesn't even know that he's ever met them. She doesn't. Mrs. Bennett doesn't know anything about this. And then he's silent. Several minutes elapse.
He's back to the old chestnut.
Yep, the old. I'm just going to be.
I'm here
and not speak, and everybody's going to think what they think of me, which isn't going to be good. I
do love how she feels about that. She was disappointed and angry with herself for being so. If that isn't the sum total of all of it, which is I'm mad and I'm annoyed that I'm mad. I'm mad at myself as much as I am at anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, she tries to read him, and then she does see that there's what Elizabeth can read is there's more thoughtfulness and less anxiety to please about him. This is something she noticed before, that with the Gardners and then with herself, that he wanted to please them. And she was, why is he doing that? He's supposed to hate me. Well, of course, we know why.
Yeah.
Just Elizabeth won't face it. But he's not doing that here.
And she seems to have progressed now too, past why is he being nice to me too? Why is he, of course he would be nice to me because there's affection there. But now it's, why did he come at all if he was just going to sit there?
And she just wants to talk to him. She didn't want to, she was in no humor for conversation with anyone but himself. And to him, she had hardly courage to speak. I mean, he's arrived and she's a mess, and she just wishes she could talk to him.
Yeah.
Well,
these are definitely the Elizabeth, the hot mess chapters. She's not doing well.
Well, Mrs. Bennett, she challenges Bingley right away. She says, "I began to be afraid you would never come back again. People did say you meant to quit the place entirely." I mean, she's calling him out on, you just dumped us all.
She almost sounds like the person being courted here, which is interesting. Yeah. Jane isn't saying, you forsook me, but Mrs. Bennett sure is. Oh, yeah. And that part where she's talking about Lydia and Wickham.
Yeah, and then she's bragging about Lydia being married, and it's to Wickham, and I wonder why it wasn't a bigger write-up in the paper. And
my brother Gardner really made a hash of it, basically.
Yeah, and Elizabeth quickly,
can't even look up. Bless her.
Well, actually, before that, she says, and then she starts talking about, thank heaven for Wickham, he has some friends, though perhaps not so many as he deserves. And she's referring to Darcy.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth's got to jump in just to interrupt her mother.
Yeah, please, let's redirect.
Like, you don't know what he did. So talk about
let's redirect to bird murder. That will be
gave
better.
him thousands of pounds to marry your daughter. That's what he did. It's the kind of friend he is. But that's what gets Elizabeth to finally speak. And then but it doesn't matter. She just thinks that they're doomed. That years.
This was a really interesting rereading it. I guess I didn't realize how badly she felt. Because I know it's embarrassing, but at that instant she felt that years of happiness could not make Jane or herself amends for moments of such painful confusion. That's such an extreme kind of reaction, and that her response is, the first wish of my heart is never more to be in company with either of them. Their society can afford no pleasure that will atone for such wretchedness as this. Let me never see either one or the other again.
Yeah,
that's it's almost I don't deserve happiness, after all of this, how could I possibly be happy? I mean, that's such a profound, and I guess it's not something that you necessarily see in the adaptations, because at that point you're just so relieved that Bingley's back and you know where this is going. But for her to sit there and basically be like, there is no conclusion to this that could possibly justify how awful this is.
And for me, it comes up right after it's because of her mother. She's like, we're right in the same position again. My mother's going to say all these inappropriate things and drive Bingley away from Jane and forever prevent, like, how could,
and he'll be right.
Darcy want to re-engage with me when my mother's talking about Wickham?
Yeah. And it's not only will she drive everyone away, everyone will 110% be justified in leaving because this is so bad. This is so awful. Mrs. Bennett, again, as a figure, I mean, she really is the mother everyone thinks about when they think of Austen. And she is so just every possible bad trope of the marriage obsessed mother. And this is just sort of the cumulative moment of, we learn nothing from Lydia and Wickham. She's still harping on that, and it's so bad that it really is destroying not just the moment, but as far as Elizabeth is concerned, potentially any future happiness they could have, because who could possibly recover from this?
Yeah, and she's the only mother like this.
That's true. I mean, there are somewhat silly mothers throughout Austen, but she's the only one who is this focused
like this,
this focused on marriage to such an extent that it's really killing her kids' chances of happiness.
Getting in the way of her daughter's meeting people. That doesn't happen in Sense.
No.
Mrs. Dashwood's not like that at all. She's trying to foster relations with, and doing it well. With her children and men. And then in
they're playing passive mothers.
Fanny Price's Mansfield, I mean, her mother is kind of off. Like, she's sent Fanny to this house to make it to improve her station in life, with the rich relatives. And so she's kind of given up her daughter, but she certainly doesn't interfere with her daughter's happiness.
No. I mean, I suppose there are also the mother figures, like the aunts, like in Persuasion, but none to this extent, where just sort of sitting in the room with them is enough. Is there such grasping kind of social climbers, but not even necessarily really social climbers, just so marriage obsessed. And again, it is interesting looking at the elder Bennett's relationship of just the most kind of ill-matched couple. Why are you so desperate to get this marriage? Almost like it's your own second chance, I guess. It's painful. And I'll never again. I do like that line in the Keira Knightley 2005 Pride and Prejudice, where it's, you don't know what it's like, basically, to have a mother like that. Elizabeth says at one point to her mother, when her mother is like, of course, I'm marriage obsessed, I have 5 daughters. That almost throwaway line of, but you don't know what it's like. You don't know how toxic of a parent you are and how that is really affecting me. So it's an interesting pushback.
Well, there is one thing that kind of gives some relief here, and that Elizabeth sees how much the beauty of her sister rekindled the admiration of her former lover, that she sees it right off the bat too, that like, Bingley's interested in you again. Next chapter. Go ahead.
Next chapter.
Yeah. 24.
Because Elizabeth says what we're all thinking, which is, that worked. You're definitely not getting together with Bingley. He really hates you, Jane.
She walked out to recover her spirits. Darcy's behavior astonished and vexed her. Why did he come only to be silent, grave, and indifferent?
In fairness, that's not really a change from the norm, is it? His behavior always, astonishes and vexes her.
How could he be, amiable to my uncle and aunt? And, if he no longer cares for me, why silent? I will think no more about him. Of course.
Teasing man.
Yeah. So Jane tries to play it cool. like, oh, don't worry, you can't think me so weak as to be in danger now. And Elizabeth's like,
I think you are in very great danger of making him as much in love with you as ever. I'm like, that's it. Yeah.
So
well, again, to know Jane is to love her, and that's what Elizabeth has said from day one. So
well, they return. Bingley sits next to Jane, but it's interesting because on entering the room for dinner, he seemed to hesitate, but Jane happened to look around and happened to smile. It was decided he placed himself by her. And then it's interesting that he doesn't make the choice all on his own.
Yeah.
Waits for the signal from her. She smiles, and then he sits next to her. So,
well, given again that Bingley was essentially convinced by his sisters and Darcy that Jane is indifferent to him, that he's waiting for a signal from her now, suggests again that's healing. It's not 100% patched up yet, but it is. I mean, again, it is an interesting kind of side thing within the text of, as Charlotte says, no one's confident enough to love without some encouragement, and Jane does need to give more signals if she wants to encourage Bingley and make him feel secure enough to get this, that they've lost some time here, so they need to get some time together. So yes, I think that he waits for her signal, and that she gives it is a step forward for sure.
Even though Charlotte Marchette said yes to Mr. Collins,
yes,
there is real.
Yes, even a stop clock is right twice a day. We can't,
But it's even more than that. I mean, she
she is sensible, and even the Mr. Collins marriage has its sense. It has its reasons behind it, but
it makes sense for her. Clearly. Yeah. All right. Well, Darcy though is as far from Elizabeth as the table could divide them. And
next to Mrs. Bennett. Oh gosh.
I mean,
just cannot catch a break.
Yeah. So I can imagine what that was like for him, the whole dinner.
Oh yes, the best dinner ever.
And then Elizabeth's hoping after dinner
I love she keeps setting up these tests for him that he then there's no way he can pass or even know about, and okay, well, I'll stop hoping if he doesn't talk to me this time. I'll stop. Like, no, you won't.
Then I shall give him up forever. Well, then,
yes,
all right. Well, the
next child,
time, I will. Yes.
Yeah.
And then when the gentlemen come into the room, Elizabeth's thinking, "I'll pour the coffee. I'll be right here." He has to come over to get coffee, but one of the other girls
I stand between him and the caffeine. He must talk to me now.
One of the other girls comes over and she says, "The men shan't come and part us. I am determined. We want more. We want none of them, do we?" And Elizabeth's like, "What are you doing?
Leave me alone."
Yes,
I know I'm Elizabeth Bennett. I have a reputation to uphold, but for goodness sake, just this once, leave me be.
This other young girl, I forget. I think it's even mentioned who they're the daughters here. I can't remember now. From the Longs.
Yeah,
I think. But doing that coy thing that we don't want the, and clearly this girl does want the men, because that's why she's saying it. She's playing that role, but Elizabeth is
genuinely leave me alone.
I want him to come and talk to me. She followed him with her eyes, envied everyone to whom he spoke, had scarcely patience enough to help anybody to coffee, and then was enraged against herself for being so silly. I mean, she's just on this roller coaster of
got it bad, hun.
Yep.
You in danger.
One second she's hoping, the next she's in despair. It just continues. And he finally approaches her for more coffee. And then he's she doesn't know what to say, right? And she's the awkward one.
So awkward. And we're kind of back to the drawing room with Caroline Bingley in the beginning, because she asks after his sister again. It's a weird kind of echo, and as much as I hate to invoke the ghost of Caroline Bingley at this moment, it's the same kind of thing of, I don't know what to talk to him about, but I need him to talk to me. I know I'll bring up his sister, because there's a space where surely he will want to talk to me about it. Surely he'll want to converse. And it doesn't really necessarily work any better for her. Although he does, stand by her silently after that failed attempt at a conversation. So maybe it works.
I hadn't likened it to being like that. She's playing the same tactic that Caroline, but for different reasons and for different motivations.
It does put that into a different kind of context, which is it's awkwardness, and it's a crush, and it's, you want this person's affection and approval, and you don't know how to get it. And there's too much, it's similar, but in a way it's a mirror opposite. Caroline says that because she has nothing else to say. Elizabeth has too much to say, and this is not the space to say it. So she's trying to reach out, but she can't, it's too much she needs to talk to Darcy about, and it's just not the time or place where she can.
Yeah. It's funny, in my notes I have, is this just the same old awkward Darcy here? And then I realized we're talking like, it's not. It's actually Elizabeth's the awkward one in this time now.
Yeah.
But he's also not helping now.
And it said, if he wished to converse with her, he might have better success, but he doesn't. He doesn't leave. He's not avoiding her, but he just stands there silently.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's the key thing. With the Caroline earlier scene, he was just trying to brush her off and get back to his letters and everything. This is, definitely that sense of, we have too much to say to each other, but now is not the time. And of course, as we are seeing happen, Darcy is also putting to rights what he previously kind of messed up. He has fixed things for Lydia and Wickham, and now we're focusing on the Jane and Bingley stuff. It's not time yet. It's that kind of, we're going to have this conversation. We want to have it now, but we're both not quite there yet. And in the meantime, it's going to be really awkward, like painfully, you're back to your freshman year in high school kind of levels of awkward here. Yeah.
Well, now they get separated again, playing and it's interesting that it's her mother who pulls him to be at the table for whist. And it's interesting, like, I wonder if her mother's even pulling him apart from the other women. Like, you're not right for the girls, so I'm going to pull you away from them.
Yeah.
But
I don't like you.
Yeah. But anyway, they're separated now, but that's all they do is look at each other. It said Elizabeth, she had nothing to hope, but that his eyes were so often turned toward her side of the room as to, and she's looking at him. So
even Mrs. Bennett is sensible of the awkwardness on some primal level and wants it to stop. So she does stop it.
Well, they, the party's over.
Best dinner ever.
Best dinner ever. The venison was great. Even Darcy acknowledged
soup was amazing. Yeah, best soup ever.
Jane was the most beautiful woman in the world. Even Mrs. Long said so. For I asked her whether you did not.
Yes. When I set up a question like that, how could she say otherwise?
Her nieces are very pretty behaved girls and not at all handsome. I like them prodigiously.
Yes. They're perfect, really. Perfect
no
wallflowers.
Competition. And Mrs. Bennett thinks that, all right, we win. That it's going to happen again.
Call it a day. Yep.
She had seen enough of Bingley's behavior to Jane to be convinced that she would get him at last.
And she's not wrong, but it's really not down to her.
It isn't. But I think the reader sees this too, but we've of course had them separated before when it seemed certain.
And Jane is playing her cards as close to the chest as she can.
Yeah.
But she's not fooling Elizabeth, obviously.
No, and Elizabeth's kind of teasing her in a sense.
This is another great, again, Jane Austen thing where Elizabeth doesn't say anything. She smiled. Yeah. Elizabeth smiled. And then it's, Lizzie, you must not do so. You must not suspect me. It's like, all I did was smile. I didn't have to say anything. I just wrote down in the margin, this is the most sister thing ever, because it is. It's the, when all you have to do is look and smile at
I'm not doing anything.
They're like, shut up. Just don't talk to me.
Well, that's what's going on.
Yeah, you are very cruel.
Chapter 55. A few days after this visit, Mr. Bingley called again and alone.
And alone.
We find out Darcy's away in London and Bingley's on his own. And that's, he's
unsupervised.
Yeah.
It's the thing we never thought would happen or should happen, frankly.
It's and it's a moment in Austen where I think she's intentionally, she wants to really let the reader know that like he's on his own, and so his actions now are going to be his own choices. It's fascinating that I don't remember in the 95 Pride and Prejudice, but certainly in the Keira Knightley one, they're there together.
I think wasn't there something in the 95 where it was Darcy basically pumping him up?
But I love the Keira Knightley one where Bingley goes out and has to like rehearse this, and Darcy's helping him rehearse this.
It's like, okay, we thought we were going to sit down, we practiced this in the shower, and now we have to do it in real life, and we have to practice
and that adaptation, they really changed around that Darcy's helping Bingley get what he wants instead of hindering him. But here it is, he's like,
he's on his own.
I have to do this myself. And I'm sure that was the conversation they had. And he's like, Darcy, I'm going to ask you to marry me. And Darcy's like, okay, I'm going to go to London.
You're
on your own, kid.
You're on your own. I mean, I do think it's a little bit of a Bingley redemption thing, though, which is, this is a character, again, who very early on is part of that conversation about, do you do what your friends tell you, or that conversation between Elizabeth and Darcy about, do you listen to your friends? Do you do your stuff on your own? I mean, now he's doing it on his own. And I mean, we get that there is at least tacit approval from Darcy, but he's not holding his hand through it. And he's not making him marry Jane. And I do think that this is an interesting moment, again, of almost Bingley redemption, where yes, this is he's going to learn to go after what he wants. And this is it. So he's going to do it now.
Well, Darcy's already learned his lesson. Darcy has already learned that, that the things that I was concerned about, I shouldn't have been concerned about.
Yeah,
he's learned
they're
this
not as important.
And then that's why he's patched up the whole Lydia, marriage, that he's already at that point. So there's no way he's going to advise Bingley any differently now. So it's just a matter of Darcy
saying, I think there's definitely
a
lesson.
Right. Bingley, you were right all along.
Yeah. And there's definitely, I think too, a lesson for Bingley there as well, which is he listened to the advice the first time and fine. But now he's got to do what he's got to do. You got to go. You got to propose, man. Come on.
Well,
although it does take a while.
There is she invites him to dine. And so, he's got no engagement tomorrow, so he's going to come back. And then he does come for dinner, and then there's all this tumult, everybody running around, getting
which
dressed.
I do love. I have to say, the Steven Spielberg in Jaws has nothing on Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice for building suspense, because this is he doesn't. This takes a while for him to do it. And I do love that. It's another thing I really loved in the 2005 version, where they're all kind of pre-proposal scene. They have that scene where they're all just lounging around doing their normal stuff within the living room, and then once the men come to visit, they're running around and they're hiding what they were originally doing and trying to clean up, and you catch them in the morning, they're not dressed yet.
Well, they're not dressed, and they're running around, and then they finally get themselves to see him, and the mother is trying to get them alone. And Mr. Bennett's off to the library. Mary goes to her instrument, and now 2 obstacles of the 5 being thus removed. Mrs. Bennett's looking and winking at Elizabeth, and Catherine, for a considerable time, she's winking away like, we got to get out of here. And this is just so funny. I mean, that kid says, "What's the matter, Mama? What do you keep winking at me for? What do I have to do out loud?
Communicate with me, woman. What am I supposed to do here? Nothing, child."
She gets her out of the room, and Jane looks at Elizabeth like, "You are not leaving." And And
I like
Elizabeth
to
did
think
this.
Elizabeth was like,
Elizabeth did
turnabout is
this.
fair play. You left me with Mr. Collins. I'm leaving you now.
Right. Like, so, but Lizzie goes out, Elizabeth's forced to go, but then she goes right back in.
Yeah.
And
well, I love too Elizabeth made no attempt to reason with her mother. Like, there's no point arguing this. Just leave the room and then come back in. It's fine.
So that's what she did. And so we're still left waiting. Like, what? That's not happening. He's not proposing yet.
Again, the buildup is mean. It's Austen mean here. Very mean.
Mrs. Bennet's schemes for this day were ineffectual. Bingley was everything that was charming, except the professed lover of her daughter. Like, he still hasn't asked.
The icing on the cake here.
Well, they bring him back for dinner. And
Jane said no more of her indifference. Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's really, I mean, it works well in the movies when he just comes back and the same day he proposes. But I do think there is something to be said for this kind of setup, which is they are taking time to get to know each other again.
Yeah.
And this is a more mature. I mean, Austen really tries very hard, I think, always to avoid those very romantic traps of, the instant I saw you, I knew, and I proposed that very day.
She does, it's disastrous,
Yes, yeah. And this is, no, we're not, Bingley is waiting for signals from her. Jane has stopped pretending like she doesn't care. We're working towards it. And as frustrating as it is for us as readers and Mrs. Bennett just generally, that's a mature love. That's a much more sensible long-term thing.
Yeah. So he stays for supper that night, and then engagement the next day. He's going to come. Mrs. Bennett sets it up that you're going to come shoot with my husband, not Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Bennett,
Of course, yes.
Sets up the hunting date. And then he does. He spends time with Mr. Bennett. And then, and I love Bennett's reaction to it too, because there's nothing of presumption or folly in Bingley that could provoke his ridicule or disgust him into silence. And he was more communicative and less eccentric than the other had ever seen him. That when Mr. Bennett doesn't think somebody's utterly ridiculous, he behaves like a normal person.
Yeah. And again, this is another, I think, redemption moment for Bingley in hindsight, and obviously a bit of a redemption moment for Mr. Bennett. But this is one of those things where I think the adaptations kind of do a wrong for Bingley, which is they make him this comedic character who is generally very foolish. But there's a distinction here made by Mr. Bennett, which is he doesn't value Wickham at all. He sees a very empty person in Wickham, as we've seen in the previous chapter. But this is, that actually there isn't, as silly as Bingley can occasionally be, and as much as he, professes to not be a good reader, not do this, not to do that, he's punctual, he's agreeable, there's nothing of presumption or folly, and yeah, I mean, he is clearly enough of a likable and good person that even Mr. Bennett, is not the playing up the eccentric weirdo version of himself.
Yeah. And all to Bingley's, credit here. Well, Mrs. Bennett gets everybody out, and because Elizabeth has to go write a letter, she doesn't realize that she's helping, and then they finally get alone. Bingley and Jane.
There are war fronts that are managed with less issues than Mrs. Bennett managing this.
And Elizabeth goes back to the room, and on opening the door, she perceived her sister and Bingley standing together over the hearth as if engaged in earnest conversation. And had this led to no suspicion, the faces of both, as they hastily turned around and moved away from each other, would have told it all. Their situation. I mean, and that Elizabeth's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. And Bingley's like, don't worry. And he leaves. Jane is,
Fortunately, her timing is good. She didn't actually, as it turns out, interrupt.
It was actually perfect timing.
Yes.
He's already asked her. She has said yes.
He's going to ask Mr. Bennett, and she's going to just yes. Why is not everybody as happy? That's such a Jane response, which is everyone should be happy. I'm happy. Everyone should be
she's the happiest creature in the world. And then she says, I don't deserve it. Why is not everyone as happy? And then, oh, I can't wait to tell everybody because then they'll be so happy. How shall I bear so much happiness?
Yeah. Again, a very polar opposite from Lydia, who is lording it, and my sisters may write me. Now this is happiness shared.
Jane is so adorable.
Yes, she is. Sunshine in human form. Just
finally, hooray! Here's a couple getting together that we can all celebrate. Before it was Charlotte and Mr. Collins were like, no.
Yes,
Wickham and Lydia were like, no.
Nice, easy, and lovely. Yes. Yeah, perfect. So, just, and Mr. Bennett, again, to his credit, seems to recognize, that this is you're a good girl. She's the Mr. Bennett and Jane, as their relationship's always interesting to me, because obviously Elizabeth is the favorite. Because she has the most similarities, but I do think he's very fond of Jane, and of course he makes the joke that your servants will always cheat you, but it's such a fond kind of way of saying it.
Well, we get two assessments of marriage. That Mr. Bennett is, you are each of you so complying that nothing will ever be resolved on, so easy that every servant will cheat you, and so generous that you will always exceed your income. But Elizabeth, just before that, she has her own assessment of this marriage, and that it is, she believed all Bingley's expectations of felicity to be rationally founded. Yeah. The kind of, and because it's the basis of their marriage is an excellent understanding of Bingley, and I love this, the super excellent disposition of Jane.
Yes, Jane is still the best.
Super
excellent. This is kind of Elizabeth's mindset. And Elizabeth from page 1 has been Jane's number one advocate and best friend. And
then she says, and then there's the general similarity of feeling and taste between her and himself, between Jane and Bingley. And on the one hand, this is this is almost like a very sensible assessment of this is why you'll be like almost something Charlotte would say, but it's not, because because this is based on the presumption that they're emotionally attached to each other, and Charlotte doesn't acknowledge that.
So Charlotte is pure rationality in terms of practical material concerns.
But this is rationality about people who like each other and why it will work, because this is how you like each other, and you've formed it and done this, and a different, and it's I think it's, I think it's in a nutshell what we find in all the good marriages in Austen.
Yes, and it's the same thing again that she in earlier chapters has come to realize about herself and Darcy, that as different as they thought that they were, really they're on the same page, and when they're talking to each other. It's that that it's the understanding thing, that line, the excellent understanding, the similarity of feeling and taste. It's we get each other, and especially compared to the Bennets, the older Bennets, which with the could not be less on the same wavelength. These two are, and
Mrs. Bennett, I was so sure you could not be so beautiful for nothing. I remember as soon as ever I saw him, when he first came into Hertfordshire last year, I thought how likely it was that you should come together. Oh, he is the handsomest young man that ever was seen. And finish that.
Yes. Wickham, Lydia were all forgotten. Jane was beyond competition, her favorite child. At that moment, she cared for no other. Her younger sisters soon began to make interest with her for objects of happiness, which she might in future be able to dispense.
Yeah. So
I'm glad the happiness is shared, but also, in fairness, I'm with Mary. You get access to that library at Netherfield. Yeah. I'm there. I'm not even, not even mad.
That's what Mary petitions for right away.
Mhm.
Kitty just wants a few balls, but
Yeah.
Mary, library.
Yep.
So I agree, Mary. That's the way to go.
That's it.
Jane and Elizabeth now. Jane tells her that he never knew I was in London. Can you believe it?
Amazing.
And he didn't, but
no, he didn't. No, not technically incorrect.
He didn't tell her this. He didn't tell her the story, and Elizabeth is glad that he didn't tell her that the sisters prevented it. But Jane realized, she said it must have been his sister's doing, she kind of blames them, but she's also like, well, I guess we'll hopefully be able to get along.
Yep.
But she recognizes
when they see that their brother is happy with me, they'll learn to be contented.
But she recognizes that they'll never be close. What we once were to each other. No. They weren't like that to you, Jane. She still won't admit that it was all one-sided.
But still, Elizabeth's like, that's the most unforgiving speech that I have ever heard you utter. Good girl.
Can't you hate them, please?
Yes, please.
Nope, not.
Well, and Elizabeth is right. It would vex me indeed to see you again, the dupe of Miss Bingley's pretended regard. Mostly it's don't fall for it a second time, because it could damage you if you fall for it a second time.
And Jane only wishes that, Lizzie could get someone. And
yeah. Well, you know what? Let me shift for myself, and perhaps if I have very good luck, I may meet with another Mr. Collins in time.
She's at least able to joke about it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we must laugh lest we cry. So,
well,
I do like that last line though too, which they're speedily pronounced to be the luckiest family in the world.
Yeah.
Though only a few weeks before, when Lydia had first run away, they had been generally proved to be marked out for misfortune. Again, it's a very Austen moment of how quickly things change, particularly in the social sphere here.
The reversal of the Bennett family fortunes.
Mm-hmm.
So they were up at the top. Bingley, the new guy in town, was interested in their daughter, and then he went away, and then everything fell apart, and then Lydia, almost
just that quickly
prior to the family, and now they're back on top. So, well,
where could we possibly go from here?
Yeah, we will. We have one more relationship to wrap. Well, next week is Lady Catherine de Bourgh visits. So
our esteemed patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Surprise of the novel, I think, when that happens.
Yes.
Like, what? No, I don't think people expected that to happen.
No.
All righty. Well, Janeites, thank you all for tuning in today. Thanks to our show sponsor, Lisa Washington. And thanks to all of you who have donated or joined as members over the last week. Your support helps us bring this show to everyone, create other one-of-a-kind programs and courses, and also helps us care for our collections at the Rosenbach. I want to thank Angela E. from San Jose, California, who made a very nice donation. And Angela also sent me a nice note about she's a Victorian dance instructor, or she was for the Dickens Universe Conference last summer at UC Santa Cruz. I hope, Angela, you'll join me for Pickwick Monthly starting next month. But also thank you for your generous donation. Some of you have even joined as members, as Jaya R. did from Haddonfield, New Jersey, and Maureen C. did from Mansfield Center, Connecticut. Rosenbach membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events. It really is true that this show wouldn't exist without your support. And you can also help support future free programs at the Rosenbach by entering our Austen Mondays raffle. This week, the prize is a Jane Austen package. It's 2 signed books by Devoney Loester, Sister Novelists and the Making of Jane Austen, and a signed copy of Natalie Jenner's Jane Austen Society, and Abigail Adams, which is a nice high level membership to the Rosenbach. Entries begin at $15. You can buy as many as you want to increase your chances of winning. And you have all week to enter. So if you haven't done it yet tonight, you can do it tomorrow. You have during the week to do this. Buy as many tickets as you want, and increases your chances of winning this fabulous prize. And the winner will be pulled on the show next week on March 6th. And then we'll do another one. We'll have another prize for the following week. So It's fun. We'll do this for the run of the finish up of the show. Like the Austen Monday videos, subscribe to the channel, leave comments there. Thanks to Brianna, who was our chat, Mrs. Reynolds, for managing the links in the chat. Thanks to Lauren Wethers and Emily Davis-Hale for taking a turn about the room with us today. Join us on our next episode when Juliet Wells will take a turn about the room with me to talk about Jane Austen's Emma, which will be a fun thing to talk about while we're finishing up Pride and Prejudice. And Casey McMillan will be my annotation co-host for chapters 56 and 57. Lady Catherine de Bourgh is not amused. Kathleen, thank you for filling in tonight.
Yep, happy to do it. Always a great time.
This afternoon, short notice.
But you know what? Surprise Austen can sometimes be the best Austen.
I love that. Yes.
All Austen's good Austen.
Surprise Austen is always wonderful. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks to Tucker Christine, who wrote and our opening and closing credits music. Thanks to my daughter Lulu, who shot and created the credits with me. Farewell, readers. May your servants never cheat you, and may you never exceed your income. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.